Hey guys, Gus here, and today I'm going to be doing a review on the colours of Battle paint range, which I've been kindly sent by the suppliers. And as you can see, they've sent me a black, white, brown, red, green and a yellow. Today I'm going to be using the Pro Art Renaissance Sable brushes, which are my go-to brushes, which I favour for most of my painting. So I'll be using those today. So there's a couple of things I'm going to go through with the various paints. I'm going to go through the actual finish of the paint, i.e. if they are sort of a satin, matte or gloss finish. I'm going to go through the coverage, so the actual pigmentation of the paint and how well they cover on these sort of neutral grey palettes in front of each paint. I'm also going to go through the paint consistency, which is straight out of the pot, you know, whether they are thin or thick or what have you. The workability of the paints, how well they mix, how well they thin down, and also how the paint works when it's been thinned down as a glaze. In addition to that, I'll be going through the consistency of the range as a whole, so how consistent paints are as a whole together. So some paints maybe are thicker or thinner than others, so hopefully the range will be nice and consistent. And right at the end I'll give you my my overall impression. So I'm going to go ahead and lay some paint down and see what the finish is like. Okay guys, as you can see, I've put down a small rectangle of each one of the colours, and just seen how they dry, and to also see the finish. Now with these paints, the finish is something akin to, it's not quite as satin as the Games Workshop range, but what it is, it's something in between. It's not like a dull matte finish like you get with some of the Vallejo colours, but it's kind of in between, and it's actually a good in between. It's not too satin, it's just below that, but it's a nice finish. So yeah, they've all taken relatively the same period to dry, and they're all the same finish, so there's no inconsistency. So some of them are not too matte and some of them are too satin. I'm actually really closely looking at them here, and they are all very consistent in their finish. The yellow, naturally, as yellows are, it's not as pigmented as the other colours. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into the actual pigmentation. So I'm going to actually start painting on to the palettes to see how much pigment are in the individual paints and how well it actually covers, painting it on as you would normally. So as you can see here, I've done a small section on each one of these grey palettes to assess the coverage of the paints. Now the coverage, I would say, is probably average across the board. Naturally the yellows, geez, I've not found a range where yellows are cover particularly well anyway. Okay, so there's no surprise there. So however, the coverage throughout the rest of the range, I'd say is good, but maybe a little bit better than average. One thing to note, however, with these paints so far, is that the drying time is a bit longer. It's not as long as P3, but it's not nearly as quick as Citadel, because sometimes with the GW and Citadel paints and Vallejo paints, they do dry too quickly, and that's when you start getting the chalky build-up and all that sort of stuff. You don't get as much working time to lay your paints on. So the working time is increased, not as much as P3, but not nearly as little as a lot of the other paint ranges out there. And you can see here the sort of coverage. I'd say the coverage is pretty much average, naturally, except for the yellows, which yellows is always going to be dramas with those. So I'll now go on to the actual paint consistency out of the pot. Now in the pots, the paints are they are consistent. Again, save for the yellow. The yellow is very, very thin, but out of the pot, the paints are all very consistent, and they have a good consistency within the pot. They don't seem to separate within the pot, so they just need a shake, and that's fine. One thing to mention about the pots, however, is these are very similar to the P3 pots. I don't think they're exactly the same, but when you use these pots, they do tend to pool in the actual recesses of the lid. So when you use them, and I've already noticed this, a good thing to do is to open it about 45 degrees like so, and actually take paint from the lid. If you open them all the way, you then get paint pooling inside the actual lid, and naturally as soon as that starts to dry, it's going to cause all sorts of problems. Alrighty. So I'm actually going to go on to the workability of the paint now. So mixing the paint, thinning the paint down with water and with acrylic retarders and mediums, and also glazing. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm now going to use all of the colours on this palette in these little recesses here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to thin them down with acrylic medium and see how they react, and I'll also thin them down with distilled water and see how they react. I'll then test them on the palettes, so I'll go ahead now and thin the paints down. Okay, so as you can see, all the paints have been thinned down with acrylic medium. I've used quite a large amount of acrylic medium and only a tiny tip of actual paint. They've thinned down extremely well. There's no separation, and they seem to be flowing quite well. So they've thinned down very, very well, no separation. And what I'm going to do now is, with these paints, I'm actually going to test some glazing with the actual paints on the rear side of these small grey palettes. Alright, and I'll see how I get on. Okay, so I've just glazed down all the ranges. The glazes are still all there. I hope you can make it all out. And they've not separated. They've remained very consistent. They flow very well. I had a bit of a drama with the white, and I'll show you right here. I just glazed a small amount on this base, and as you can see, the white was a bit streaky, simply because I didn't thin it down quite enough. But the actual glazing of it, the paint flows well. Okay, it flows well and it's smooth. Okay, it's good to work with. It wicks well, and what have you. Now. Yeah, and that's the sort of the second to last test I'm going to go through. In terms of mixing the paints all mix absolutely fine. I'm not going to demo that. They mix great. There's no dramas with mixing whatsoever. So I'm going to move on to a couple of points and share my final thoughts. Okay, so the colours of battle paints. Now, I was sent all of these for free to trial them out. Insofar as the paint itself. The paint is good, okay? The quality of the paint is good. I have a few gripes, and I'll be completely and brutally honest about this. These paint pots, at first glance, they look exactly the same as the P3 pots, alright? However, I had big problems with the actual paint collecting. Let me just get one of these out, and I'll demonstrate it for you. When you open the paint pot up, alright, I had really big problems with the paint immediately pooling on the inside of the lid, alright, right on the inside of that lid, and pooling down, and when I closed the lid I actually had paint spraying out and splattering all over the place, and I thought, why the hell is this happening? Okay, and I thought, well, these are exactly the same as the P3 pots. However, they're not. If you look at the bottom of the pots, the P3 is made by a range called Plaisu, and this is made by no range. It just has some sort of cryptic square symbol on the bottom, and I thought, well, from the outside they look exactly the same. However, when you open them up, I'll notice this. Alright, the P3 range has a larger inner lip, okay, to help it seal better when it closes, but the main difference is, let's see if you can spot it. Let me open these up. Try not to get paint everywhere. Let's get some light on here. Is the actual tongue inside the lid. Now you'll notice with the colours of battle paints how thin that is, okay, compared to the P3 range. So with the P3 range, that tongue inside the lip is big enough to cover the inside of the pot when you open it, so any paint dripping off will go back into the pot. However, with these, the colours of battle, they're too thin. So what ends up happening is the paint runs off onto the inside of the lip, and when you close it, I've literally been doing it and using these for the last 10 minutes, and the paint sprays out. So, in essence, in short, the pots are crap. right? The pots suck ass. However, my final thoughts on the range, in terms of the actual paint, they're good paints. They are good paints. They're almost like your intermediate paint. Okay, they don't dry as quickly as GW or Vallejo, so they give you more working time. So if you have problem with paint drying too quickly and chalky buildup and what have you, these are better. They don't dry nearly as slowly as P3. Okay, so they are suitable for wet blending, but not as good for wet blending. They're kind of an intermediate. Okay, and in terms of thinning the paints down and using them for glazes and things like that, and thinning the paints down, they react perfectly. They react really, really well, and they don't split. They don't start coming apart. They don't, the pigment doesn't come apart from the binder, and they are well pigmented paints. So they are a good range, and I'd say that, if you don't like the P3 range because they dry too slowly, and you don't like the colours, and you don't like Vallejo and Citadel because they dry too quickly, and you don't get enough paint in the pots, then this is a very good range for you. It's a very, very good, solid intermediate range. However, these paint pots are not good. The actual paint is great, but the paint pots are not good. And again, they are a very consistent range, and I really like that. Unlike Game Color, which is not consistent, I really like consistent ranges, and this, judging from these paints here, they are a very consistent range. Naturally, yellow, you always have a fucking problem with yellow. Yeah, yellow is yellow, right? So there we go. That is my review on the Colours of Battle paints. I hope you enjoyed the review. Please post comments, give me your feedback, tell me what you think. And I would recommend that you do purchase at least some of these paints and try them out for yourself. Take care, guys.